In this lesson, we'll work on a persimmon. It's a simple shape and a different color and texture than we've worked with so far. It has that white waxy coating on it that you might see on grapes or plums, and I'll show you how to accomplish that. I've provided a reference photo of the persimmon in your class materials and a line drawing that you can work from as well. Of course, the first thing you'll want to do is transfer that line drawing onto your good paper. Remember to keep it light. Our next step is the value study. For this one, we'll put tracing paper right over our photo. Using our graphite pencil, we'll start the process of marking in where the lights and darks are. Remember that this doesn't have to be perfect. We just are making notes for ourselves of where the shadows will fall. This is going to become really important as we move on. I'm looking first at the persimmon itself, at the fruity part, and then I'll take a look at the leaves on top. I'll leave an opening where the highlight falls, that brightest part, even though on the persimmon I don't see anything quite as shiny as I did on our leaf. When I make a value study, I'm looking for a range of values, not just light and dark, not all medium. I need to have some light areas, medium areas, and dark areas. This is really to give me more information as I go forward. This isn't the finished product, so don't worry about it being perfect. Let's take a look at this little cap. There are areas where these leaves fall into the well, and there are areas where the light will hit them heading out. There's a little stem in the center. It's like a little cone. I'm just looking for the areas where these leaves bump and dip to remind myself where the lights and darks will fall. All the detail will come in with colored pencil. So this is just the start of the structure. Now I can check my progress by moving this off of the persimmon. I can see the areas where I've completely missed. It's easy enough to line it back up and catch those. If you're having trouble seeing through to your reference photo, here's a tip. Just put it on your light box, or hold this whole apparatus up to a window and light will come flooding through and give you much more information. You can see it doesn't take forever to capture this value study or the lights and darks, but it's so important. Now that looks pretty good to me. Next, we're going to try a whole new technique. We'll create an underpainting for our persimmon. Here I have my very light tracing of the line drawing. I've chosen an orange for the persimmon body and a green for the leaves. Remember, we always want to transfer in color. I'm going to replicate this value study onto the drawing. And it might be tempting to use a graphite pencil. We're going to do something different. This technique is called grisaille. It's a French word based on the French word for gray, which is gris, G-R-I-S. It was developed in the Renaissance when pigments were so expensive that artists could barely afford to paint. They would create a gray underpainting and add just a few layers of color. It works for colored pencil because colored pencil is so similar to oil paint. It works in translucent layers. So, for this technique, I'm going to use a gray colored pencil, and I'm going to build some layers of value. Lighter than I did with the graphite pencil. I'll want to stay about 20% lighter. It's important to choose the right gray. And let me talk for a minute about what gray pencils are. We think of gray as something on the spectrum from white to black, maybe a mix of white and black. But a gray colored pencil is actually a mix of complements. What that means is that you have to be careful so that you don't create mud later. The one I've chosen for this technique is a warm gray. It lends itself a little bit toward brown, meaning it has quite a bit of red and green in it. Those are the complements creating this color. That'll be a nice underpinning for our orange persimmon. Since brown is a neutralized orange, it's going to help us later. Now you'll notice I have a very sharp pencil and a light touch, and I'm just glazing this pencil on. I don't want to go too fast or too dark because I don't want my gray to bleed up through my drawing. The reason I'm doing this is to create a structure for my drawing. I want to remember where the lights and darks fell so that as I add color, I don't really have to reinvent anything. I'm creating what a sculptor might think of as an armature, just something to hold my drawing down. I'll work this with my light layers, adding more layers where I want it a little darker. But really in this technique, I don't want to go too dark anywhere. I think of it like the three bears. I don't want it to be too dark or too light. I want it to be just right. This gray is all going to disappear under the color as I draw it in later. I'm staying out of the brightest part of my persimmon. I'm leaving it white, even though this isn't a shiny fruit. I want to keep a nice light area. One trick in drawing is to remember that we're working from a three-dimensional object onto a two-dimensional surface. Part of the responsibility of the artist is to create the illusion of form or shape. To do that, we have to add a little bit more contrast than we might actually see when we look at the photo. This is building up nicely, and that's about as dark as I want to get. It's just a lighter version of what I already had. Let's take a look at these leaves. I'm looking back at the photo, and I'm looking at my value study. If I had a real persimmon here, I'd be looking at that too. As much information as I can get, the better. I'm looking at these little folds and the shadows that happen under them. Here's the stem. Remember, that's kind of like a cut-off cone. So I'll give it a little extra punch of dark on the side. This technique really helps with the confusion we can feel between hue, which is color, and value, which is light and dark. When we place it all down for ourselves ahead of time, we'll never get mixed up. We'll come back with other shadow colors, but we'll know exactly where to put them. You can see this starting to shape up. I can still see the tooth of the paper through my drawing. That's just fine. I'm going to need it for the orange and green colors to hold on to. Don't speed through this process. It's a little bit like when you paint a room. If you forget to tape off the windows, fill all the holes, speckle, you don't get as good a result. So we're just creating our prep. I'm using a 1 and 2 pressure, never pressing harder than that. I don't want to crush the paper tooth and make it so that I can't attach more color later. In a few little places where I see that I have very dark darks, like just under the fold of this leaf, I'm going ahead and going just a little darker. That'll remind me that I had some dark points that I wanted to hit. And I'll be making such a dark value there later with color, it won't matter if it's dark now. In other areas, I'm going to leave some empty space. They won't stay white, but I don't want to overdo the shading. Keep a sharp pencil and a light touch, and remember not to go too dark. With a new technique, it always takes some practice. So you may find that the first time you try this, you don't put enough on, and it just gets all absorbed into the color. So you'll try it a little darker, and you'll find that it affects your color too much. You'll find that sweet spot with practice. Okay, now we have this great structure to create our persimmon, but I forgot one thing. I want to put this persimmon right down on the table, so I'm going to add its cast shadow. You'll see that in your photo reference. I don't want to add the whole shadow, but I'm going to get the start in with my grisaille. With that gray, I'll just add a little scoop. This is off of the persimmon and a little bit onto the table. It'll remind me to do that in color later. Okay, I think we're all set. Now the next step is to pick our colors. When we start to choose colors, I'm going to pick one set of colors for the oranges and one set of colors for the greens in the cap. You'll see a little green in the orange, a little orange in the green. If I get them set ahead of time, they'll mesh perfectly. So let's start with the persimmon flesh. Once again, my first thought is I need local color. So I'm going to try starting with my orange yellow. If I bite into a persimmon, which is delicious, that's the color I'm going to see. It's an orange, but not really a soft orange. It has more of a red feel, so I'll go directly to my orange red. Let's see what we get when we layer that over the orange yellow. I like the look of it, but it isn't quite rich enough for my persimmon. I'm going to add a little bit of my violet red. That is perfect. That little touch of violet in the violet red dulled down my orange a little. It gave me a little darker color. And if I go back with another layer of my yellow, I can brighten it right up. I'm using analogous colors here: orange yellow, orange red, violet red. They're all from the same side of the color wheel. And remember, that's what we use to get a richer or brighter color. The one color I haven't really used yet is orange. So let's add a little bit of that, maybe just on part of that dot, to see what it does. There are parts of my persimmon that definitely have that orange feel. I think I really like that. So I know what I've done. I've added 2 layers of the yellow and 1 of each red and the orange. There's my color map to remind me what I need. In part of the persimmon, there's a little bit of a violet color, more than I could get with the violet red. So just on a little part of this, I'm going to add my lighter violet. I'm reaching out of my analogous range a little bit. It'll dull a little part of that brightness down, but I like that for the edges of my shadows. In one color recipe dot, I have a lot of information, and it's going to be really handy when I move on to that persimmon. Now for the greens, I need to look at what will give me a duller green. So I think I'll start with my green blue. That brings quite a bit of green into the mix already, but I'll skip over my green yellow and go to the orange yellow. That gave me that sort of lime green that I liked before. This isn't quite right yet, so I'll make a couple of layers to build it up. Then I'm going to dull this down even more. I'll show you how. So I've used 2 layers of yellow and 2 layers of blue. Let's make a note of that before we go on. I'm going to bring in my other blue. This is the violet blue. I'll stick with that yellow, and when I add a little of this violet blue, it just dulls down that green, just the right amount. I'm just going to cover half of the dot because I may want some of this green in the brighter areas, and I may need that in the darker areas. I'll add one more layer of my yellow, and I've really got all the greens I need right there. I think I just used one layer of that violet blue. So I have a good start for my orange and my green. I don't need to know everything yet about the color, but I need to know what to pick up first. Now I've got it. The last thing is that I need to try them over gray to see what will happen to those colors, particularly the orange. So here's my warm gray that I used for the grisaille. I'll just lay down one layer of that, and I'm actually going to vary it a little bit to see what happens in the lighter and darker areas. I'll add a little of my yellow, followed by my two reds to make sure that the gray isn't going to overwhelm these colors. I forgot to write down the first one. I had yellow, then red, and here's my other red. I can see that this is going to work and that my gray won't be too strong. So I'm okay with that. Let's orange it up just a little bit. Yep, I can already see shadows building right under that color. I feel like I'm ready now to start on the piece. So I'll have all these pencils handy and ready to go, and we'll come back to the color recipes later to decide on shading colors. But we need to see what we're getting. Our grisaille is in place. We've got all this nice gray pencil, and in fact, it's starting to look a little like a plump persimmon already. We'll put aside the gray now, and it won't come back. There's a thing about colored pencil. You can lay gray underneath, but if you bring it in later, you're sure to get mud. Let me show you how to prevent that. Our first color in our color mix was orange-yellow. I'm going to seal down that gray with the lightest possible layer of orange-yellow. This is that zero pressure, just a whisper. I'll lay it over all of the gray on the persimmon, and I'll lay it over the gray on the leaves as well, since it was our first color in our green mix. It's barely there. If you can just barely see it going onto the paper, you've done it right. Think of this as a protective barrier between the gray and your other colors. If you press hard on this layer, it'll start the gray mixing up through your other colors. And we really want to just lock and load it so that it is ready to accept color later. I'm adding it where the green will be built, and we're going to have kind of a funny looking, dirty gray yellow persimmon. Don't worry, it won't stay this way. But everywhere that you have gray, you're going to want to do this super light layer of yellow. If I were doing a different color, I would use the lightest layer of that. So if these leaves were petals and they were pink, I would use a little layer of pink. It's the first thing in your mix that creates that locking layer. There we go. It just made it kind of light yellow. Now I want this actually to build up as more of a yellow. I'm going to start with the persimmon, with the orange part. So I'm going back with another layer of yellow. This time I can press with about a 1 layer, and you'll see it actually start to turn more yellow. That light layer provided the lock, and now I'm just building on top of that instead of into the grays. When I start a project like this, I'm going to use a couple of different pencil strokes because I've got a little larger area to cover than we did on the leaf where we used tiny little brush strokes. I'm starting with that large elliptical stroke just to get some color down. As I get more precise as we go along, my pencil strokes will get more precise too. My goal here is just to keep things smooth and keep the color flowing. I'll move to my next color, which was the orange red, and I'm going to add some color here. I'm not worrying about shadows now because my shadows are baked in. They're underneath everything else. I just want to start building the color of the persimmon. You may wonder what's the right number of pencil layers to create a color. There's actually no good answer for that. 2 is not too few, and 20 is not too many. But I will give you this pointer. The fewer pencils you bring in to the mix, the less likely you are to get mud. If you're careful to follow your own recipes, you won't bring in the complement too soon. Now, as I create this initial orange color, you can see that in the areas where there really wasn't much gray or none, it's a little brighter, and the shadows are starting to show up where I had more gray. That's that armature or structure that I'm building on. I'm going to sneak into the highlights a little bit as I build my color because the persimmon really isn't shiny, so I won't want a big white highlight. My next color in my color recipe was violet red. It's time to give that a little play. Now I'm going to be a little careful now. I'm going to keep my violet red a little more toward the edges. I'll let some of the areas just be my orange yellow and orange red. I'm ignoring the leaves for now, and I'm ignoring the cast shadow. The cast shadow will be the very last thing that we work on. I'm still working in those long loops and patiently building color. I think I'll add a little bit of my orange from my color recipe. So what's on the paper now is that initial gray, orange yellow, orange red, violet red, and now orange. You can start to see the beautiful nuanced color coming up. I'm pulling this into the highlight a little bit just to tone it back, but I'm never completely covering it at this point. I like the way my color is coming up. I want to show you what happens when you just choose one color and when you don't have those careful pencil strokes. In this example, I picked the color closest to the persimmon, which was my orange red, and I just used that. I added darkness by more orange red, and you can see it has kind of a flat, cartoonish look. Instead of a dark that I got with the gray, I'm just getting more color intensity. It's all there, but it isn't very pretty. I also traced this one with too hard a line, so I have this sort of coloring book outline. I think the difference is remarkable. Take your time. I'm going to keep building up color slowly and slowly. This is a good time to put on a book tape. Maybe you can draw for a couple of chapters. Now you'll notice that my pencil strokes are getting smaller. I started with these long loops, and now I've shortened them by about half. It gives me a little more precision of where my pencil is going. I want to start varying the depth of the color in different areas on the persimmon. I'm always looking back at my photo reference. In fact, here's a tip. The more you can look at your reference and the less at your hand working, the better your drawing will be. You want to focus on what you really see, not on your glamorous hand drawing circles and circles and circles. I'm creating a little bit of variation and texture by where I put down more red. You'll see that this is a little bit lighter down at the bottom, just ahead of the shadow. I want to keep it that way. That's a phenomenon called reflected light or bounce light. As the light comes down and hits the surface, which would be the table, it bumps back up and creates just a little bit of lightness before the edge. If I draw a dark value right up to the edge, this would look like half a persimmon stuck down on the paper. That's not really what I want. I'm adding a tiny bit of pressure now. I'm at about a 1.5 or 2. As you recall, when we get to this halfway point, we can add just a little bit of pressure or change the angle of the pencil. I'll do both to press a little bit of color into my persimmon. My circles are getting smaller and smaller, which helps to even out the texture. Because I'm making little circles, I can change directions without affecting the look of the persimmon. I have long lines that go across. I'm just flattening out the image. We call it the picture plane. That's what you actually see. I'm going to switch now to my violet red pencil, another one in my color mix, and start deepening my shadows. Where are the shadows? Well, I laid them in with gray, so I know exactly where they are. I can see them through the other colors. And as I add my violet red, it will enhance the shadows, but I don't have to decide where they are. That's one thing I love about working with a grisaille. I'm also going to add a little bit of the texture that I see on the persimmon reference. I see some little stripes that go off to the side. I'll add them in that same rounded texture into the highlight. I see some little blobs that come over in the highlight here, so I'm just breaking it up bit by bit. I've got some nice dark areas that tuck up under the leaves, so I'll start building those too. I planted them with my gray, and now I'm just going to blend them into the color of the persimmon. My goal with this persimmon is to have a realistic looking drawing, but I still want it to look like a drawing. There's no point in trying to perfectly replicate a photo. Photos are good all on their own. I like how this is going. I think I'll leave the fruit here and move to the leaves. I'm checking back with my color recipe, and I see that I started with green, blue, and orange yellow. I've got that little ceiling layer of orange yellow, so I'll just start with a little bit of green, blue, especially where my grays are located. I'm back to my super light layers, and these leaves are going to need a little different pencil stroke, more of that brush stroke that we used on the leaf in the last lesson. Always remember that colored pencil work doesn't look like much until it's finished, so don't give up too soon. I'm just glazing on a little blue over that initial yellow glaze, and then I can start building my green. When I notice in my color reference that there's a lot of red in the leaves, I'm going to leave that till the end. I'll add it on without mixing, like we did with the red blush on the pear. I want it to stand out, not to turn into a brown. Let's go back to the yellow. The color in this cap or in the leaves on the persimmon is a pretty dull green. So I don't really want to blend it into a bright, vivid green. I'm going to kind of layer this up with that dull color in mind. Nothing on the cap is very shiny, so I don't really have to leave big clear areas for highlight. Those will just be shown with sort of lighter versions of my same green. The graininess of the paper is going to help me here with this texture of the leaves. I'll be smoothing out the persimmon, but keeping the texture in the leaves. I think I'll pick up my third pencil, which was the violet blue. Remember how that dulled out the green? I think that's going to help us here, and it will emphasize those dark areas. I'm going to hit those first. I darkened them initially with gray. Now I'm going to hit them with the blue. We have a nice little fold right here. And the trick to doing folds is to have lights and darks play off each other. So I'll emphasize that fold just a little bit. I'm making tiny marks with my pencil. I don't really want to overcommit at this point. I'm just reinforcing the structure. I have a lovely little dark fold right there. And another one where this leaf flops over. Now you'll notice that I laid down a little bit of a line. I don't want it to end up as a line, I want it to be an edge. So I'll start in my dark line and just pull those little eyelash strokes right off of it to tuck that dark up under the leaf. That's a good trick to know. Are you starting to see the flow and fold of those leaves? What they need now is just to turn green again. So back to my yellow and blue. I'll give them another coat. I'm using about a 1.5 pressure here. I really don't want to press hard because I don't want to get a waxy, heavy look on these papery leaves. Back to my green blue. That's a big part of this mix. And now we'll see the leaves turn that nice dull green. We're really using colored pencils as paint here. You notice the color that I haven't added in yet to the green leaves? Green. I'll have the opportunity to do that, but I'm going to wait a little bit. I'd rather build the color this way and then use that just to highlight a few areas that fall more to that green. When a persimmon is ripe, the leaves are actually starting to turn brown. So I don't want to make these leaves bright green. I want to let them get nice and dull. Oh, missed a spot. We're about halfway finished. Now's the point where we want to start bringing in those complements to enhance the shading. I want to bring in a good color to shade with. Not that gray, that would just create some mud. So I'm going to go back to my idea of component complements. I've got two types of violet, a light one and a dark one. The red in the violet will support the red in the orange-red persimmon, and the blue will provide the complement. They'll work for the green too. The blue will support the green while the red provides the complement. It's kind of a 2-for-1. I'm using two different values because I want to use the least amount of color I can to get the most impact. In the lighter areas of my persimmon, I'm going to start with my lighter violet. You won't see a lot of effect right away, but on our color recipe, I used a little bit of this light violet. It creates just sort of a dulling, light shadow effect. It's going to be perfect. I can see in the darker areas of the persimmon that it won't be enough. That's where I'll bring in my darker violet. Just like always, I want my shadows to become encapsulated in the color. You can see I'm using about a 0 pressure, and you can see the shadow popping right up. That's because it's attaching to that gray I had underneath my colors, and it creates shadow with very little effort. I like the way that this darker violet is creating a little drama, and I can really see the roundness of the persimmon coming into focus. It's the darkest way over here on the right side, but I don't want it to turn into a purple stripe. So I am now blending with my 0 pressure out onto the rounder part of the persimmon. So darker here, lighter as I go across. There's a little bit of dark just at the bottom of the persimmon here. I'll add that in too, to give it something to sit on where it meets that shadow. I can see that I have a little darker along this left side. I'm looking at my photo reference, but I'm adding this in little increments. The worst thing I could do at this point is go in hard. I want this to build up rather than laying on in a thick way. I'm pretty happy with this shadow on the right side. It's a little more, honestly, than I can see in the photograph, which makes it just about right. Drawing is part magic. You have to create an illusion so your viewer will understand what they're looking at. Now I want to put that shadow back in the context of the red. I think I'll just pull in my orange-red pencil, which is the closest color to the persimmon. I'm going to add one more layer right over that purple. It'll deepen it a little bit, and it'll turn it back to red. There's a funny phenomenon that happens when something goes in a frame. The glass in the frame creates a slight magnifying effect. And if that shadow in purple was sitting right on top of the colored pencil mix, you'd actually see it as purple when this is in the frame. We don't frame everything, but who knows? Maybe you'll want to frame this one. I don't have to go over everything on my persimmon with this red, just the areas where I added a little more shadow. But remember that I used my lighter violet too, and I don't want that standing out on top either, so I'll go over most areas with my red. I still have a little bit of highlight showing, and I'm going to treat that next. I'm using the small loops of color. It's staying nice and smooth and round, and I'll be smoothing this out even more. Now I'm back to my orange yellow. I don't want a bright white highlight on this persimmon because it isn't shiny like an apple where the light bounces directly back to its source. It has a sort of matte texture that absorbs a little light. So I'll run my orange yellow pencil through my highlight very lightly, no more than a 1 pressure. And you'll see it just takes down that highlight just a little bit and warms it up. I'm going to bring a little bit more of that orange yellow into some other lighter areas of my mix. Maybe down here where I have that reflected light too. I feel pretty good about the persimmon body, so let's add another touch to the leaves. We have to think about color harmony. That's where the red of the persimmon gets into the leaves. There's a little bit of green that happens into the body too, so we'll add that. When I look at my photo reference, there's quite a bit of red that sits on top of those leaves. I'm going to just add that and not go back with too much green. I want that to sit right up. It's a little duller than this pencil, so I'll show you how to dull it down too. I see it kind of skimming along the ridge of that leaf. And it's almost a crusty look of red that gets onto these leaves. You can see though, when that red is in the greens, it kind of relates it to the whole persimmon. I'm going to go back now with my green pencil and just touch the brightest areas of green with a little bit of the green pencil. I've mixed my green from blue and yellow. Now I'm just topping it with green to finish it off. Here's that eyelash stroke coming in from the outside to create that fold. I'm running it up to, but not over, the red that I laid down. Now I like the crusty texture on those leaves. I'll have a little more finishing to do, but I'm feeling pretty comfortable with the texture. At this point, I'll add a tiny bit of green into my darkest shadow. You won't really see it, but your eye will know that it's there. When light would hit these green leaves, it would probably bounce a little bit of the green down onto the red. There's my color harmony. The next step is to work on texture. While the leaves are rough, the body of the persimmon is smooth. Let's bring in our blender and see if we can blend these colors and smooth out this texture. Remember that the blender works in small circles with quite a bit of pressure. I'm using about a 3 or 4 pressure, and I need to do that to create enough friction and heat to melt that colored pencil into the paper. I'm staying out of the leaves, and you can see already that the texture is changing. It makes the colored pencil look a little more like paint, and it's going to provide the perfect surface for us to add that coating. This will give us the perfect surface to add that waxy coating at the very end. Now it's interesting to note that even though there was gray under all this pencil, we sealed it in with that very first light layer of yellow, and you won't see gray emerging to the top. Really, when we blend, we attach most to the most recent colors. You can see that I added a layer of yellow last, and it's brightening up. I'm really liking the color. I'll always have a chance to go back and adjust it 1 or 2 more times, but I really won't be able to change it dramatically once I've done this blending. So just be sure you're at a good point in the project before you blend. My blender's getting really dull. It won't really matter whether the blender is sharp or dull. Just keep turning it like you would a colored pencil. At this point, I'm going to use the blender to push a little color into my highlight. I'm grabbing a little color from the outside and just blurring those edges. Now I'm to the darkest part of the persimmon, that dark shadow, and mostly my blender is picking up the reds and the violet. I don't lose the dark shadow when I do my blending. If anything, it enhances it. I'm not going quite to the edge. I'll sharpen my blender before I do that part. I don't want to push pigment off onto the paper. I can blend right up to the edges. I'll still be cleaning them up just like I did before. But I don't want to have a lot of rough colored pencil out at the very edges. The sharp blender helps me see where I'm going and get right up to that line. Now, as I've been finishing this persimmon, I notice it's gotten a little yellower than I would like. So at this point, I'm going to choose my violet red pencil and come back in certain areas just to add back a little bit of that darker orange color. It's almost red. I'm choosing the violet red because I don't want to make this any more orange. I want my persimmon to turn more toward that deep red color. I'll break up some areas that got a little too uniform, and I'm just adding pencil. It's sitting right on top of the mix and changing the color just a little bit. That's better. Now, before I clean up the edges, I want to work on the leaves a little more. They look a little pale compared with the persimmon. I think I'll go back in with a little bit more of my yellow and blue and a little more pressure. I want to deepen that green a little. I'm not really burnishing or pressing hard. I'm just trying to make my color a little more rich. At the end, I'll be adding details to these. I'm using about a 3 pressure now. I kind of mean to get some pencil onto the page. I'll use my blue because I know that will create a little bit deeper green. I don't think I'll go back to the green pencil. I don't think I'll need it. Before I add the final details to the persimmon and the leaves, I'm going to clean up the edges of both. I'll be adding some different techniques, and I don't want to rub my hand over that later. Working from the inside again with the closest color to the color of the persimmon, I'm cleaning up all those little furry edges, gathering them up with a fresh line. You won't really see this as a line. I'm working pretty lightly, but I want a clean, crisp edge on this shiny persimmon. I can add back a little color right up to that new line. You won't even know it's there, but it takes care of the fuzzy edges. I would do the same thing on this side with my paper flipped over. With the green, I have edges to clean up that fall over other color, but I'll still do it the same way. I'm going to use my green pencil to just tidy this up. I don't want it to look like a line, so I can start in the green edge that I made and just pull little pencil strokes in toward the center. As I do this, I can see that I'm losing a little bit of the red. No worries, with colored pencil you can always go back. Where I have a fold, like this, where the leaf is folding over to the back, I don't want to draw a line at all. So I will create that edge with those little eyelash strokes, planting them one next to the other. I want to really pull the green leaf off of the red body of the persimmon. Now let's enhance that red just a little bit to balance out with the new level of green that we have going. It's just another layer. If it feels too bright, I can dull it down with the complement. The complement of the red is the green, and I think I'll put a little bit of the green into that red, just to tone it out. I like the look of that. I'm glazing through with a 0 pressure, just adding a little touch of green into the red. After all, the red is just sort of a blush on the green leaf. The last important detail in the green leaves is that little stem that really looks kind of dark brown. It sits down in a well, and I'm going to create that with my brown pencil by adding a little dark lip where it sits in. And right over the green, I'm going to add some brown so that that stem becomes its own little shape. The very top of it isn't white, it's ivory, and fortunately, I have an ivory pencil. I can just add that in with the ivory pencil. I'll also use the brown to darken the darkest little parts of those leaves. The brown works because, again, I'm bringing in a little bit of complement. The blue that's in the green and the brown, which is a neutralized orange, are complements. So I'm just amplifying my darks. This leaf has a very dark tip, and I think the brown, maybe mixed with a little purple, will just give me that almost black look. This is now just fiddling. An artist friend of mine calls this putting on the jewelry. I'm just crisping up those last details. I'll go back with a little bit of violet. Violet mixed with brown creates almost a black, and we'll just give ourselves a little bit of drama in the leaves. I don't want everything to blend together, but you've seen this color. It's what I used to create the shadow on the persimmon, so I'm not really introducing anything new to the mix, just working with what I already have. Okay, the leaves are looking a lot sharper now. The last thing that I need to add is the bloom. The bloom is that waxy surface that I keep talking about, and you see it on your photo reference. It's an interesting thing that you'll see often on grapes or plums. Nature creates this white, waxy coating on fruit to keep it from ripening on the tree too fast. It reflects light. As we handle those things, some of it comes off, so it isn't all over everything. With a white Prismacolor and my completed color, I'm going to start adding the bloom. Now watch and listen. You'll hear the point on the Prismacolor break. It'll be fine. There it went. I'm using a hard pressure. I am just about at that 5, my hardest pressure that's available. I don't have to copy the pattern of the bloom exactly, but I'm just scribbling. Got some chunks I'll get rid of. I'm just scribbling this on right over the color. I'm leaving little gaps here and there. And you'll see the bloom start to separate. I'm actually adding a layer of white here. Just like with every texture, it's better not to add it everywhere. Your eye will fill in the gaps. It doesn't take away the dark shadow because shadows happen even under that white bloom. Think of this as just a coating that we're adding on. Now when I look at the photo reference, I can see that there's a little bit more contrast. I'm coming back with my violet red pencil, and I'm going to work in between the layers of the areas of bloom a little bit and add just a little more red to really make that white bloom pop. The bloom in my photo reference looks like it's a little bit violet, and I can shift that color from white to violet by coming in with my light violet pencil and adding just a touch of color here and there in that bloom. It won't mix with all the colors underneath because I've sort of sealed the colors with that, first with the blender and now with the white pencil. These are layers that are just stacking up one on top of the other. The very last thing on my list is the cast shadow. I've got a little indication with my gray, but here's a tip. Cast shadows aren't really gray. They really are all of the colors of the object and the color of the surface. My persimmon sits on a white surface, so I will just pick up some of the colors of the persimmon. I need some dark right under the persimmon, so I'll start with my violet. I'm going to tuck a line of dark right under the persimmon and then work off of that. It's creating the edge of the persimmon and the shadow. I'm not going to push this shadow too far out, but I want to turn it red, the color of the persimmon. So I'll add a little of my violet red into that violet, letting it go just a little beyond the violet. I'm going to put a touch of green into this mix. It's okay if this one gets a little bit muddy. And I'll finish this off with a little bit of indigo. I like this very dark blue against the orange persimmon because when you put complements adjacent, they pop. So that'll give us a nice dark. I'll let that run off the edges of my shadow. And there we go. It just helps to seat the persimmon down. In this persimmon, I spent a little bit longer. I added a few more ruffles to the leaves. I tidied up the edges a little bit more, and I just toned the colors together where they seemed a little separate. I'm really happy with the results. I probably spent about 2.5 hours on this one. In the next lesson, we'll do our last and final project, a pretty pink tulip.